Are you lost too, mister?
Are you, Muna?
Are you lost too, Mr. The airport terminal hummed. With the usual chaos of delayed flights and frustrated travelers, Richard Sullivan sat alone in Gate 47, his expensive suit perfectly pressed, his leather briefcase resting beside polished shoes. That cost more than most people's monthly rent. At 58 years old, he had built an empire from nothing. Sullivan Technologies had made him a billionaire 3 times over. Yet tonight, on Christmas Eve, he had never felt more hollow. His phone buzzed again. Another message from his assistant. Another crisis at the Tokyo office. Another reason why he was here, instead of anywhere that felt like home. He stared at the screen without really seeing it, his jaw tight with a kind of tension that had lived in his shoulders for so many years he'd forgotten what. Relaxation felt like, "Excuse me, mister." The small voice cut through his thoughts like a bell. Richard looked down to find a little girl standing before him. She couldn't have been more than 5 years old, wearing a bright red coat that seemed too big for her tiny frame. A knitted bear hat sat slightly crooked on her head, and she carried a small green backpack that looked heavy on her shoulders. Her cheeks were pink, and her eyes held that particular shine that children get right before tears come. Yes, Richard heard the coldness in his own voice and winced internally. "Are you lost too?" she asked, her small hand reaching out to gently touch his sleeve. The question struck him as odd. Lost. He knew exactly where he was. Gate 40, Sechi Terminal B, waiting for the red-eye. To Singapore. Another meeting. Another deal. Another empty hotel room in another city where he knew no one. "I'm not lost," he said, his voice softening despite himself. "Ah, you." Her lower lip trembled. "I can't find my grandma. We were going to see my daddy for Christmas, but there were so many people, and I turned around and she was gone." Richard felt something crack in his chest. He glanced around the terminal, suddenly aware that this child was alone, vulnerable, and frightened. Years of board meetings and hostile takeovers hadn't prepared him for this moment. "What's your name?" he asked, lowering himself to one knee so he could meet her eyes. "Emma," she whispered. "Emma Rose Patterson." "Well, Emma Rose Patterson. My name is Richard, and I think we should find your grandma together. Would that be all right?" Emma nodded, and without hesitation, she placed her small hand in his. The trust in that gesture hit Richard harder than any business loss ever had. When had someone last trusted him so completely, so innocently? They walked through the terminal together. Richard's long stride shortened to match Emma's small steps. She held his hand tightly, her backpack bouncing with each step. "What does your grandma look like?" Richard asked. "She has white hair like clouds," Emma said, her voice gaining confidence. "And she wears a purple scarf. She smells like cookies and hugs." Richard felt his throat tighten. Smells like cookies and hugs. When had he last described anyone with such pure affection? "And your daddy?" Richard found himself asking. "You're going to see him for Christmas?" Emma's face lit up despite her worry. "He's a soldier. He's been gone for a really long time. Grandma says he's very brave. I made him a picture, but I left it in my backpack pocket so it wouldn't get crumpled." They passed coffee shops and gift stores, Richard asking gate agents if they'd seen an elderly woman looking for a lost child. Each person shook their head, their eyes softening at the sight of the well-dressed businessman holding the hand of the small girl in the red coat. "Mr. Richard," Emma said as they paused near a large window overlooking the tarmac. "Why were you sitting all alone? Don't you have anyone to go home to?" The question was so direct, so guileless, that Richard couldn't hide behind his usual defenses. He looked out at the planes taken off into the dark sky, their lights blinking like distant stars. "I suppose I don't," he admitted quietly. "I have a big house, but nobody's waiting for me there." "That's sad," Emma said with the brutal honesty of childhood. "Everyone should have someone." They continued their search. checking near the restrooms, the food court, the children's play area. With each passing minute, Richard found himself more invested, more concerned. Emma's hand in his had become a lifeline to something he'd forgotten existed. Purpose that wasn't about profit margins. Connection that wasn't transactional? "I'm scared," Emma whispered, as they sat down for a moment on a bench. "What if I never find her?" Richard pulled out his phone, but instead of checking his endless stream of emails, he pulled up a photo. It was old, the colors slightly faded. A young Richard, maybe 30, standing with his arm around a woman with kind eyes. Between them, a little girl with pigtails grinned at the camera. "This was my daughter," Richard said softly. "Her name was Caroline. She would have been about your age here." Emma leaned in, studying the photo. "Where is she now?" "She's grown up," Richard said. "She lives in Seattle. We don't talk much anymore." "Why not?" Richard closed his eyes. Why not, indeed? Because he'd missed her school plays for board meetings. Because he'd chosen mergers over her college graduation. Because somewhere along the way, he'd convinced himself that providing money was the same as providing love. "Because I made mistakes," he said. "I forgot that the people we love are more important than the things we build." Emma looked at him with those impossibly wise young eyes. "You should call her." "Maybe I will," Richard said. And for the first time in years, he meant it. They stood up to continue searching when Richard heard a voice calling out with desperate urgency. "Emma! Emma Hosi! Grandma!" Emma's whole body came alive. She pulled Richard forward, running toward an elderly woman in a purple scarf who was frantically talking to a security guard. The reunion was everything Richard had hoped to see. Emma flew into her grandmother's arms, both of them crying, holding each other as if they'd never let go. The grandmother rained kisses on Emma's head, checking her over, whispering thank you to God and anyone who would listen. "This nice man helped me," Emma said, turning to Richard. "Mr. Hishar. He stayed with me the whole time." The grandmother looked up at Richard, and in her eyes, he saw such profound gratitude that he had to look away. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for keeping us safe." I only turned away for a second, and she was gone. I thought I'd lost her. I thought. "She's fine," Richard said gently. "She's a brave girl. We're going to see my daddy," Emma announced proudly. "He's a soldier." The grandmother smiled through her tears. "We are. He's been deployed for 18 months. This is his first leave." Richard felt something shift inside him, like a door opening that had been locked for decades. Here was this family, separated by duty and distance, fighting to stay together. And here he was, with all the money in the world, having pushed away the only family he had. Emma Reaches said, kneeling down one last time. "You remember what we talked about?" "About calling the people we love." Emma nodded seriously. "I'm going to do that," Richard said. "Because of you. You reminded me what's important." Emma suddenly hugged him, her small arms barely reaching around his neck. Richard held her carefully, feeling the weight of her trust, her innocence, her hope. When she pulled back, she reached into her backpack and pulled out a small candy cane. "For your trip," she said, "so you won't be alone." Richard took the candy cane, his vision blurring. "Thank you." Emma rose. As they walked away toward their gate, Emma turned back one last time and waved. Richard waved back, standing in the middle of the bustling airport, holding a candy cane and feeling more present than he had in years. He pulled out his phone and stared at it for a long moment. Then he scrolled through his contacts until he found the name he'd been avoiding. Caroline, his daughter, his little girl, who wasn't little anymore. His finger hovered over the call button. Fear tried to stop him. Pride whispered that it was too late. But Emma's voice echoed in his mind. Everyone should have someone. He pressed call. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Richard's heart pounded. Then, a cautious voice. "Dad." "Caroline," Richard said, and his voice broke. "Sweetheart, I know it's late, and I know I have no right to call after so long, but I'm sitting in an airport on Christmas Eve, and I just met this little girl, and she made me realize something." Silence on the other end. "Then, what did she make you realize?" "That I've been lost," Richard said simply, "for a very long time, and I'd like to find my way home. If you'll help me." He heard her breath catch, heard the years of hurt and hope colliding in that single sound. "Where are you going, Dad?" "What flight?" Richard looked at his boarding pass for Singapore, then at the departure board showing flights to Seattle. In that moment, the choice was crystal clear. "I'm going wherever you are," he said. "If you'll have me, I'm coming home." The tears came then, from both of them. Years of silence breaking apart in the most healing way possible. As Richard changed his ticket and headed toward a different gate, he unwrapped the candy cane Emma had given him. It was peppermint, sweet and sharp, tasting like childhood and Christmas and second chances. He looked out at the tarmac where planes carried people to reunions and new beginnings. "Sometimes we need to get lost," he thought, "to remember what we're searching for. Sometimes a child's question is the answer we've needed all along." Gate 23 was calling now. Seattle was waiting. His daughter was hoping. And Richard Sullivan, CEO of nothing that mattered as much as this moment, walked toward the life he'd almost let slip away forever. Behind him, somewhere in the vast airport, a little girl in a red coat held her grandmother's hand and headed toward her own reunion. Tomorrow, she would see her father and give him the picture she'd made. Tomorrow, two families would be whole again. But tonight, on Christmas Eve, in the chaos of delayed flights and tired travelers, a simple question had changed everything. "Are you lost too, Mr.?" And the answer, Richard now knew, was yes. But not anymore. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe for more stories about the unexpected moments that change our lives. Leave a comment below telling you it's about a time when a stranger's kindness made a difference in your life. Your story might inspire someone who needs hope today.